Christians today seem to think that the great falling away started in our present generation. However, this demise has been around since Jesus stepped into ministry, or even at the time of his birth. Satan does not waste time, nor does his benefactors, demons. The temptation of departure from authentic faith were seen as early as Peter denying Jesus before his death on the cross. Thus, the falling away is not a new cultural origin. Since the day Jesus was born, the masses began organizing ways to rid this child of influence. In fact, he started his life with two supporters, Mary and Joseph. According to Scripture, by the time of his death, he had two at the foot of his cross, Mary and John, and possibly Mary Magdalene. If there were more, we were not told about it. Either Jesus needed a marketing team, or he was never predestined to appeal to the masses. Humanity is fickle. Can you imagine spending 3.5 years training 12 disciples, all to end in cowardice acts of betrayal, selling you out, or being fearful of finishing the race with the one who devoted their life to equip you? How about sleeping on the job when Jesus was moments away from being arrested? Well, outside of John, all that happened to Jesus and much more by his own disciples. Jesus' life and mission started with the treatment of betrayal, hatred, and cowardice, and without question, it ended in like manner. So what are the odds of the first generation church maintaining their loyalty to Christ through the apostles? What are the odds of today's self-proclaimed Christians remaining faithful to him? The answer is not good. The millennial generation receives that bad rap regarding our modern movement to deconstruct faith. Even though statistics support this claim, Jesus might be the one behind this falling away. Yes, you heard that correctly. These statistics are based on church membership. Ironically, Jesus has never been supportive of church membership or the building of empires of religious outreach. Jesus has refuted the ideology of numbers since the day he was born. However, he has always been focused on reaching his elect bridal members with his indwelling life, one life at a time. The core issue is not about people falling away from Jesus Christ. It is predominantly about Jesus separating the goats from the sheep. meaning goats are fake Christians with lip service. Since religious humanity appears too stupid to advance sovereignty, they quickly default to people deconstructing faith they never had. Maybe these goats need the handwriting on the wall. Welcome to number 14, the handwriting on the wall. King David said these insulting words, "Pay heed, you senseless among the people, and when will you understand, stupid ones?" That's right out of Psalms chapter 94, verse 8. I know and agree that it does sound insulting unless you view what the king is saying through the basis of all humanity is born with a depraved mind. Secondly, the meaning of stupid is knowing the truth but refusing to act upon it. Jeremiah said something like-minded. In Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 22, he says this, "For my people are foolish, they know me not. They are stupid children and have no understanding. They are shrewd to do evil, but to do good they do not know." Belshezaar was certainly one of these stupid people quick to do evil. This kind of evil provoked an immediate, hand-signed personal response from God himself. The words, "Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin," were written on the king's party room wall. What did these words mean? Belshezaar was about to find out. Let's review our scriptures. Remember to study the entire chapter of 5. But today we're going to focus on verses 4 through 6. And it says, "They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together." Looking at party time for Belshezaar. Belshezaar was the spoiled grandson of Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar's son, Merodach, was too wicked to be king. Thus Babylon's regents chose Neb's grandson, who was light-hearted, fun-loving, and loved by the people. Babylon was at its peak of glory when Belshezaar was made king. The new king knew that the best way to rule the kingdom was through fleshly pleasures. In other words, fed the sinful nature of his nobles, kept them happy, and allowed them to indulge in the treasures of Babylon. To celebrate this new kingship, he gathered 1,000 of his nobles to have a feast of the gods. Shortly after the party started, Belshezaar gave the brazen command to have his servants get the gold and silver chalices reserved for the high priests of the Jewish temple, which was saved and preserved by King Nebuchadnezzar. They were forbidden vessels for humans to touch, let alone drink from. This was the forbidden act of evil that provoked God. Belshezaar received the vessels and continued toward his drunkenness while praising the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, something very unusual happened. The finger of God arrives on the party wall. So let's take a look at the finger of God. In Daniel chapter 5, verse 5, it says, "Suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing." Now we all know that drunk people tend to see things. However, never do all those who are drunk see the same hallucination. It was a real-time event for all at the king's party. Secondly, all in attendance knew that this was indeed a supernatural happening. As for the king, his face went pale. He panicked and went weak at the knees. As per the norm of Babylon's kings, Belshezaar called on his demonic sorcerers. Not one of them could interpret the writing message after he bribed his conjurers with temptations of power and wealth. The king's face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed and filled with mystified confusion. Now let's take a look at the queen had an idea. The scriptures tell us that the queen was not in attendance at this bizarre party. Wise lady. However, after hearing the commotion, she steps into the room. Belshezaar's queen attempts to calm the king by saying, "There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belshezaar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation." Belshezaar summons his guards to bring Daniel to the king's party room through the queen's request. Although it is a bit bewildering to think Nebuchadnezzar's son had no clue who Daniel was. In conclusion, whether this queen was Belshezaar's wife or queen mother, God used her to usher Daniel back into the prophetic timeline. In either case, Daniel is about to have the king's attention. Our story unfolds yet another brazen king who leads Babylon down a highly insulting path to the Hebrew God of the Jews. This time, however, the king insults God directly by drinking wine from the holiest cups known to the Jewish people, which I might add were blessed and preserved by the mighty hand of God. As in the case of the Ark of the Covenant, this set of chalices come with a protective measure. Those who touch them must die. That is, of course, outside of the high priest of the Jewish temple. It might have served the king to have done his homework regarding this. Coming up next, Daniel interprets the handwriting. King Belshezaar did not know Daniel. That was obvious. According to the queen, it appears the king didn't even know he existed. After Nebuchadnezzar died, Daniel was not welcomed into Belshezaar's palace room. The king knew nothing about the God of Daniel. How the son of Nebuchadnezzar could miss Daniel's influence of his father's life is a great mystery. Talk about a detached family. This single mystery causes some theologians to question if Belshezaar was the real son of Nebuchadnezzar. But history reveals Belshezaar and Nebuchadnezzar III, which we know is Nebuchadnezzar's son, were brothers. In either case, we know that Belshezaar is in deep trouble, and thanks to the queen, Daniel is introduced to the king for another interpretation. In our next episode, we will detail the interpretation of Daniel's reading of the handwriting on the wall. Warning: the story does not end well. The results of the interpretation ended Babylon once and for all. This one interpretation shifted Babylon into the hands of the Medes and the Persians. We'll spend a great deal of time talking about this transition. Thank you for joining us today. It's always a privilege. We know you have many options of listening to podcasts online, so we are very grateful that you chose us today. Until next time.
For I was just a boy when I came here, when 70 years are completed for Babylon.
Have faith, my brothers.